The dragon's forbidden embrace. The moon hung high above the dense whispering forest as Princess Seraphina tightened the leather straps of her armor. The kingdom of Drathar had been plagued by a relentless dragon, one that left villages in ruin and fear in the hearts of her people. As both a princess and a warrior, Seraphina refused to stand idly by while her kingdom suffered. She vowed to hunt the beast herself and end its reign of terror. Before departing, she stood in the grand chamber of the castle, facing her father, King Eldric. The aging king's gaze lingered on the flickering flames of the grand hearth, his mind clouded with memories of past battles and sacrifices. He had seen too many warriors fall, too many sons and daughters lost to the call of duty. His own brother had never returned from a fateful campaign, and now his only child stood before him, determined to follow a path fraught with danger. He clenched his fists, the weight of those losses heavy on his heart, yet he knew he could not stop her. The duty of a ruler and a father warred within him as he turned to meet Seraphina's resolute stare. The chamber, adorned with towering stained glass windows and marble pillars, bore the weight of centuries of history. Golden chandeliers flickered overhead, casting wavering light across the polished stone floors. Heavy velvet drapes swayed gently with the cold night breeze seeping through the arched windows, adding to the gravity of the moment. The scent of burning incense mingled with the tension that filled the air, making Seraphina's pulse quicken. She felt the weight of duty pressing upon her shoulders, yet determination burned in her heart as she met her father's worried gaze. The aging ruler, his once golden beard now laced with silver, paced anxiously before his throne. His brows furrowed with concern as he stopped to look at his daughter, the firelight casting long shadows across the stone walls. "Seraphina, my child," he said, his voice strained with worry. "You are the strongest warrior in Drathar, trained by the best, but this dragon is unlike anything we have faced before. It is cunning. It is ruthless. I cannot bear the thought of losing you." Seraphina stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. A flicker of hesitation crossed her mind. She had trained for this moment her entire life, yet here stood her father, the weight of his fears pressing down upon her like an unseen force. Could she truly leave him behind, knowing the uncertainty that lay ahead? The answer was already decided. Duty called, but the ache in her heart reminded her that even warriors were not immune to the burdens of love and loyalty. "Father, I was not trained to hide behind these walls while our people suffer. If we do not act, more will perish. This is my duty, and I will not fail." King Eldric sighed heavily, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his burdens. "You are my greatest pride, but you are also my only daughter. I fear that in trying to save our kingdom, I may lose you." Seraphina smiled softly. "You will not lose me, father. I will return victorious. And when I do, the people of Drathar will no longer live in fear." The king nodded reluctantly, knowing that there was no changing her mind. He reached for her hands and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Then may the gods watch over you, my brave warrior." With a final bow to her father, Seraphina turned on her heel, determination burning in her eyes. The hunt for the dragon had begun. Yet amidst the chaos, Seraphina found herself face to face with a mysterious warrior in the depths of the forest. The man, his presence both commanding and enigmatic, had appeared as if from nowhere, his silver eyes piercing through the shadows. He studied her intently as though he recognized something within her, though they had never met before. "Who are you?" she demanded, her hand instinctively gripping the hilt of her sword. "A traveler," he replied smoothly, a faint smirk playing at his lips. "And you, princess, are far from your castle." Seraphina's breath hitched, her mind racing with questions. How did he know her? Had he been watching her before this moment? Her grip on the hilt of her sword tightened as she forced herself to remain calm. "You know who I am?" she asked, her voice measured but edged with suspicion. "It is hard not to," he said, tilting his head slightly. A warrior princess wandering alone in a dangerous forest, it is quite the sight. She narrowed her eyes, uncertain of his intent. He was unlike any man she had ever met. Dangerous, yet oddly intriguing. Her instincts urged her to leave before she lost herself in those haunting silver eyes. Without another word, she turned and fled, vanishing into the trees as swiftly as she had appeared. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she weaved through the dense foliage, her mind racing. Was she running from him, or from the strange pull she felt toward him? Each step carried her deeper into the shadows, yet the warmth of his piercing gaze lingered. A shiver ran down her spine. Not of fear, but of something else entirely. Curiosity, perhaps. Or was it destiny already weaving its threads around them? As she disappeared into the night, his voice called after her, "When will I see you again?" She paused for a brief moment, her breath catching in her throat. Something about his voice, the way it carried through the darkness, sent an unfamiliar shiver down her spine. Her instincts told her to keep running, to disappear into the shadows without a second thought. But a part of her hesitated. Who was he really? And why did she feel as though their paths were already intertwined? Finally, she whispered, "Destiny." Then, without another glance, she vanished into the trees. But duty called. On the night of the hunt, Seraphina rode out with a band of warriors, her sword gleaming in the torchlight. They followed the dragon's path of destruction, tracking the charred remains of trees and scorched earth. Deep in the forest, they found massive footprints embedded in the soil, leading toward the distant mountain range. The scent of smoke and ash thickened in the air, guiding them forward. As the night deepened, they set up a temporary camp near a small stream. While her warriors rested, Seraphina took a moment to cleanse herself in the cool waters, washing away the sweat and dust of the journey. The gentle current rippled around her, the moonlight casting silver reflections upon the surface. She sighed, allowing herself this fleeting moment of peace. A warrior princess bathing in the open? Bold, a voice echoed through the trees. She tensed instantly, her hand darting for the dagger she had left at the stream's edge. She turned swiftly, her heart pounding, to find the mysterious man from before. Ronan, leaning casually against a tree. His silver eyes gleamed with amusement. "Do you make a habit of sneaking up on people?" she asked, sharply, rising to her feet, her confidence masking her vulnerability. "Only when the person is as intriguing as you," he answered with a smirk. "You continue to surprise me, princess." She scoffed, reaching for her clothes. "If you are here to distract me, you are wasting your time. I have a mission to complete." He studied her for a moment before speaking again, his voice more serious this time. "And what happens when you find what you seek? Will you be ready for the truth?" Seraphina narrowed her eyes, unsure of what he meant. "I will be ready for whatever comes." Ronan nodded as if he already knew her answer, then took a step back into the shadows. "Then I suppose I will see you when fate allows." Before she could respond, he disappeared into the forest. Her fingers tightened around the fabric in her hands as she exhaled sharply. There was something about him she couldn't quite grasp, but there was no time to dwell on it now. She finished dressing swiftly and returned to her camp. As she settled near the fire, she found herself stealing glances into the darkness, half expecting Ronan to reappear. His cryptic words lingered in her mind, gnawing at her resolve. Was there a deeper truth she had yet to uncover? With renewed determination, she led her warriors deeper into the mountains, following the tracks that would lead her to the dragon. With her heart pounding, Seraphina pressed forward, tracking the dragon's path as her warriors followed closely behind. The air grew thick with tension, their movements careful as the terrain became treacherous. They climbed jagged cliffs and crossed narrow ledges where one misstep would mean certain death. At times the dragon's tracks would disappear only to reappear farther ahead, as if taunting them. It was not simply fleeing, it was leading them somewhere. The scent of smoke thickened as they ventured deeper into the mountainous terrain, the sound of distant growls echoing off the cliffs. Her grip on her sword tightened as they moved cautiously through the rocky landscape, their eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Suddenly, a deep rumble vibrated through the ground, sending loose pebbles skittering across the rocky path. The warriors halted instantly, their grips tightening on their weapons. Some exchanged uneasy glances, while others instinctively raised their shields, their breaths quickening. The torches flickered wildly, as though the very air itself trembled in anticipation. A sudden hush fell over the forest, the usual night sounds swallowed by an eerie silence. The temperature in the air seemed to shift, growing unnaturally warm as the scent of sulfur thickened. Even the wind dared not stir the branches, as though nature itself awaited the impending confrontation. Serafina's breath quickened, the pulse in her throat pounding as she tightened her grip on her sword, feeling the weight of the moment press down on her like an unseen force. Serafina's pulse raced as she felt the vibration beneath her boots, a primal warning that they were no longer alone in the mountains. Ahead, in a clearing bathed in moonlight, lay a cavern entrance, its jagged mouth exhaling plumes of black smoke. Sarafina raised a hand, signaling for silence, and stepped forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then a massive shadow unfurled from within the cavern, glowing eyes locking onto them. The warriors braced themselves, gripping their weapons tightly, but Sarafina hesitated. Something about the way the dragon moved, the way it watched her, made her pause. This was not the mindless beast they had prepared to slay. It was something far more calculated, far more knowing. The beast let out a roar that sent a shockwave through the ground. The warriors braced themselves as the dragon emerged in its full, terrifying form, its scales shimmering under the moonlight like polished obsidian. Some stood frozen in place, the sheer size of the beast paralyzing their limbs with fear. Others tightened their grips on their weapons, exchanging tense glances as their battle instincts took over. The air around them grew thick with heat, the dragon's breath crackling like embers carried on the wind. A few warriors let out battle cries, trying to shake off their dread, while others took a cautious step back, realizing that they were facing something far more formidable than any creature they had encountered before. With her heart pounding, Seraphina raised her sword, charging at the dragon with the ferocity of a warrior queen. The beast's eyes flared with molten gold as it reared back, releasing a deep guttural growl that sent tremors through the earth. Its massive wings unfurled, sending a gust of wind that rustled the trees and nearly knocked her off balance. As she closed the distance, the dragon's muscles tensed, its razor-sharp claws digging into the ground in preparation for the attack. It lowered its head slightly, nostrils flaring, before letting out a burst of fiery breath aimed just inches from where she stood, testing her resolve. She dodged the sweeping tail, rolled under its fiery breath, and drove her blade toward its chest, only for the beast to counter with a powerful gust of wind from its wings. The force sent her and her warriors tumbling back. One by one, the dragon subdued the soldiers with calculated precision, knocking them aside, pinning them down with its massive claws, or leaving them dazed from the concussive force of its roars. Yet it did not strike the final blow. Instead, it left them incapacitated but alive. Sarafina struggled to her feet, gasping for breath, her mind racing as she met the dragon's piercing gaze. The beast hesitated, something unspoken passing between them in that moment. Then, before her very eyes, the dragon began to shift, its massive form shrinking, reshaping into something else entirely. Into a naked Ronin. He knelt in the dirt, his breath ragged, his muscles taut as though bracing for the inevitable blow. Seraphina instinctively took a step back, her grip tightening around the hilt of her sword. Her pulse roared in her ears, torn between disbelief and the rising tension in her chest. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to act, to strike before he could shift again, yet something held her, frozen in place. Was it fear? No, it was something far more complex, something she couldn't yet name. His silver eyes, once burning with the intensity of a beast, now held a mixture of sorrow and resignation. His chest rose and fell rapidly, and his hands trembled slightly as they gripped the ground beneath him. The power that had once coursed through him as a dragon seemed drained, leaving him vulnerable in a way Seraphina had never seen before. Shock and heartbreak crashed over her like a tidal wave. Her breath hitched, the world around her blurring as if the ground beneath her feet had disappeared. A sharp ache spread through her chest, but anger flared within her, momentarily masking the pain. Had everything between them been a lie? Her fingers trembled around the hilt of her sword as her mind warred with itself, between the betrayal she felt and the undeniable connection that still lingered between them. Memories of their brief encounters in the forest surged to the surface. His voice, his knowing gaze, the way he seemed to challenge her not just with words, but with something deeper. It had always been him. Every moment, every encounter, had been leading to this revelation. Ronan stood before her, breathing heavily, his silver eyes filled with sorrow. "Seraphina," he whispered, his voice laced with regret. "I never wanted you to know like this." Tears burned in her eyes, but she held her sword firm. You are the dragon? The one who has tormented my people?" "I have never harmed the innocent," Ronan said, stepping closer. "I only destroyed those who sought to destroy me first. The kingdom hunts me, and I had no choice but to defend myself." Seraphina's heart waged a war against itself. He had lied, yet he had also saved her countless times in the forest, protected her, loved her. Could she kill the man who had become her heart's greatest desire? A horn sounded in the distance. Her warriors were near. She had mere moments to decide. Ronan took her hand, pressing it against his chest. Seraphina's breath caught, her fingers trembling against the warmth of his skin. A dozen thoughts warred within her. Her father's face filled her mind. The kingdom she was meant to protect. The warriors who had fought by her side. Was she betraying them all by even considering his offer? Her heart pounded, torn between duty and the unshakable connection she felt with the man before her. The wind rustled the leaves around them, carrying with it the distant sound of the approaching warriors. Time was slipping away, forcing her to choose. "Come with me, Seraphina. There is another way. We don't have to be enemies." Her people, her kingdom, her love, everything was at stake. But as the sound of approaching warriors echoed through the trees, Seraphina made her choice. With a final glance toward the home she might never see again, she whispered, "Fly." Her chest tightened as a swirl of emotions crashed over her. Exhilaration at the unknown, sorrow for what she was leaving behind, and a spark of anticipation she dared not name. The wind whipped around them as Ronan's wings spread wide, lifting them into the night, carrying her toward a fate she could no longer deny. Ronan shifted in a swirl of dark energy, his wings unfurling as he scooped her into his arms. For a heartbeat, Seraphina hesitated, her gaze flickering back to the warriors lying, incapacitated on the ground. Was she truly abandoning them? Her father? Her people? What would become of them without her? But then she met Ronan's eyes, filled with an intensity that seemed to see straight through her. The weight of her decision pressed down upon her, but she took a deep breath, steeling herself. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back now. As they soared higher, Seraphina looked down at the kingdom below, the land she had sworn to protect, the warriors who had followed her, her father waiting for her return. What would become of them? She clenched her hands against Ronan's chest, her heart warring with itself. She had chosen this path, but the weight of it was only beginning to settle upon her shoulders. As they soared into the night, Seraphina knew her story was only beginning. A tale of love, war, and the forbidden romance between a princess and the dragon who stole her heart.